The dining room of the Caldwell house was illuminated by the chandelier's exquisite glow, yet the atmosphere at the table was frigid. My father, Richard Caldwell, whose business I had salvaged from bankruptcy, was seated across from me. He pretended that tonight's dinner was just like any other while concentrating on slicing into his steak. However, it wasn't. Not after his previous statement. "You mean Emily will be the business's owner?" I spoke steadily, but my hands were balled into fists beneath the table. My father sighed, as though he were telling a toddler something that was obvious. "Lauren, let's be realistic. Technical skills are your strong suit, but leadership? You're not strong at that." My stomach twisted. He pointed slightly to the opposite end of the table and said, "We need someone with presence. Someone who commands respect. The best option is your sister." I looked over at Emily, who had a little knowing smile on her face as she swirled her wine glass. When Caldwell Enterprises was about to go bankrupt, she had done absolutely nothing to assist. However, she was being given everything now that the business was making record profits because of the software I developed. My chest was thumping with my heart. I had devoted my entire life to this business. Every weekend, every late night, every last bit of my energy. They too believed that I had no value. I inhaled slowly while attempting to speak in a level voice. I created the software that kept this business afloat. You wouldn't even have a business to pass down without it. My father laughed as if he found what I had said funny. After that, he nonchalantly threw a crumpled $20 Santo on the table after reaching into his pocket and taking out his wallet. Between my plate and my unopened wine glass, there was a $50 bill. "For your work." There was silence in the room. My mother looked at me and shuffled uneasily, but she remained silent. Nobody did. Emotions raced inside me as I gazed at the money, the insult. $50. Years of labor. For the restless evenings I had devoted to creating the framework that saved us from bankruptcy. For the invention that made Caldwell Enterprises a $300 million empire instead of a dying relic. I made myself maintain my composure. Managed. Written. I picked up the $50 bill, folded it neatly into my napkin, and then flipped it over in my fingers. Then I got up. My dad hardly looked up. "Don't be dramatic, Lauren." He dismissively waved his hand. The warmth was gone from my smile. "I'm not exaggerating. I just excused myself." I made a small dress adjustment while maintaining a firm yet courteous tone. I put the napkin back on the table and said, "Obviously, I am just a supporting character in this family. I will therefore leave the scene." Emily chuckled softly, her laughter scarcely disguised. My mother said, "Lauren, but I had already turned to leave. I did not slam the door." I didn't shout. I just walked away. The office I no longer occupied as usual. I got to Caldwell Enterprises early the following morning. Something felt different this time, though. The office was silent, uncomfortable. Workers looked at each other anxiously as I passed. People whispered as I went by. I scowled but continued to move. My steps stopped as I got closer to my workplace. The door stood open already. I expected to see my regular workspace as I walked in, complete with my desk, computer, and work. But it was all gone. They had cleared my desk. There was no sign of my computer. Lauren Caldwell, CTO, was no longer listed on the nameplate. Emily was sitting in my chair, idly going through some papers. She smiled brightly, artificially, as she looked up. She laid the papers down neatly and said, "Oh, good morning, Lauren. Did Dad not tell you? This office is where I'll be relocating. You will now report to me." I was filled with nausea. However, my expression remained unwavering. "What role do I play?" I spoke in a composed tone. Emily cocked her head in thought. She shrugged after that. "We'll come up with a solution. Perhaps something related to its support, its assistance, in my own business, in the business I had rescued." She grinned. "Actually, Dad advised you to take a break, calm down, perhaps work on some hobbies." She leaned forward a little, as though she was having fun. "Don't worry, though. In one way or another, you will continue to work for the corporation." I inhaled deeply. My ears were pounded by my heartbeat. They desired my departure, following all of my actions, following each sacrifice. I was being thrown away as if I were an afterthought, as if I were worth $50. My sister caught my attention. Next, I noticed the company's emblem on the glass wall in my office. Caldwell Business. a name that previously stood for legacy, loyalty, and family. It only meant treachery now. I didn't argue, though. I didn't object. I just gave a nod. Comprehensive. I turned and left after that. They believed they had triumphed. They assumed I would quietly vanish, take whatever scraps they threw to me, and perhaps even plead for permission to stay. However, one notion lingered in my head as I entered the elevator and the doors closed. Observe me. My initial action was to disappear. Not exactly. The following day, I still arrived at work, still seated at the small desk they had given me in the building's farthest corner, surrounded by interns who had no idea who I was. I didn't defend myself. I refrained from arguing, I observed, and I witnessed firsthand what was taking place in less than a week. Emily was in a lot of trouble. She didn't know how to manage a business, much less one that had recently grown into a multi-million-dollar empire. She made snap decisions based on intuition rather than factual information, while spending her days in never-ending meetings. Her buddies, whose only qualification was knowing which wine went well with which cheese, took the place of department heads who attempted to advise her. Not only was the business at risk, but it was also about to fail once more. And everything they were currently demolishing was something I had built. That's when I decided what to do. If they were against my working at Caldwell Enterprises, I would construct a larger structure. I didn't defend myself, not quite yet. Rather, I waited and observed. I saw Emily's demise develop in real time from my small desk in the far corner of the building, surrounded by interns who hardly knew my name. And even I was surprised at how quickly it was happening. The business I had saved, Caldwell Enterprises, was already beginning to fail within a few weeks. Emily was having trouble. She didn't know how to manage funds, logistics, or even simple leadership choices. She dismissed important meetings, disregarded senior staff's concerns, and spent more time organizing lavish events than managing the business. Even worse, she had swapped out capable executives for buddies who had little financial acumen but knew just how to stroke her ego. And the repercussions were severe. There were delays in projects. Customers were irritated. Already, revenue was suffering. People were becoming anxious. And I anticipated it all. My knowledge of the industry was genuine, unlike Emily's. The software was my creation. I had planned the financial recovery. I had previously saved this business. I was now witnessing them ruin it. But I made a decision rather than retaliating right away. I'd let them burn. And I would get up once the ashes had settled. I wasted no time. I was sitting across from three of the smartest, most skilled people I had ever worked with in a quiet coffee shop. Late one evening, long after most employees had left for the day, Jake was our former CFO. He was aware of every financial weakness in the sector and had balanced the books when the business was in deep debt. Maya, a talented data analyst, was essentially the one who designed our system for customer profiling. Because we had spent so many hours writing together, driven by desperation and coffee, David, our lead programmer, was the only one who knew my software as well as I did. Within the last month, all three have quietly quit, as they weren't fools. The writing on the wall was visible to them. They were now waiting for me to initiate contact. Jake's eyes were keen as he bent forward. "What's the play here, Lauren?" I gave them a look. I moved a folder across the table after that. Everything I had been secretly working on was in there. A fresh setup. The system has been enhanced and refined, quicker, more effective, and more sophisticated. Something considerably larger than the Caldwell Enterprises project I worked on. I explained plainly, "We're building something new." They didn't even think twice. They were in. Emily and my father had failed to see one thing. Yes, Caldwell Enterprises was the name under which my original program was registered. In a technical sense, they did possess the rights to it. However, the most recent version, the most feature-rich one, the enhanced model, the one that would completely reshape the sector, what was the update that changed the game? It was never available to them. This was the first time I had uploaded it to their systems. I still owned it. It would now serve as the cornerstone of something bigger. For the next month, I worked silently to improve the program and make it stronger, faster, and more effective. Then I took action. I approached Caldwell Enterprises rivals, directly rather than offering my program to them. Executives who had been lurking like sharks, waiting for a chance to overthrow the once dominant Caldwell empire, were among those I met. I introduced them to a system that would transform the sector and render Caldwell's antiquated paradigm obsolete. I had several offers in 3 weeks, and at the month's end, I made an agreement. A $50 million deal. Suddenly, I was up against more than simply Caldwell Enterprises. I was going to ruin them. The first hint of problems for my father's business appeared inconspicuously. A client who has been with Caldwell Enterprises for more than 10 years abruptly terminated their agreement. Then came another, and yet another. Emily went into a panic. She blamed everyone but herself, fired staff, and demanded answers. However, the reality was straightforward. The business had changed. Their competitors' systems were now being operated by my software, which was the next generation of software. Suddenly, Caldwell Enterprises was out of date, and I had only just begun. I was drinking champagne in a posh hotel ballroom while the keynote speaker concluded their presentation, 6 months after they attempted to bury me. One of the largest industry gatherings of the year was the Tech Innovators Gala. Every significant executive, investor, and CEO was present. What about this year? The honored visitor was me. I got up and walked onto the stage as my name was called, my heels clicking on the shiny stage. The host grinned as her voice reverberated throughout the space. Tonight, we honor the trailblazers advancing the industry. She turned to face me. Lauren Caldwell has revolutionized the way multinational corporations function by developing the most innovative logistics software available today. Her business, Nova Systems, is currently worth more than $500 million. The cheers were thunderous. However, I noticed a familiar face as I peered out into the crowd. My dad, beside Emily in the rear seat. Their business was in danger of going bankrupt once more. Both of them were aware of it. I grinned, not with malice, not in retaliation. However, because I had at last grasped the lesson they had been trying so hard to impart to me, I didn't require their approval. On my own terms, I had prevailed. And now? They couldn't do anything to stop me. I knew as soon as I left the stage, the Caldwell Enterprises project was completed. I had been observing their demise for 6 months. I had executed a plan that gradually eroded their empire, piece by piece, and had played my cards perfectly. And this evening, it was a checkmate. There was nobody around, so my sister and father sat close to the back of the ballroom. They had been the focus of attention not long ago because they were strong, untouchable, and dreaded by their rivals. Now, though, they appeared to be specters of the people they used to be. Emily's fancy clothing and flawlessly done hair were unable to conceal the tiredness in her eyes. And my father, who was always so calm and confident in his own power, appeared older, defeated. Because they both understood in their hearts that it was over. Control was the foundation of their empire, but as soon as they attempted to remove me, they lost it. And now it was they who were being wiped out. My shoes clicked quietly on the marble floor as I approached them. Emily refused to look at me as her hand clenched around her champagne glass. But then my dad glanced up. He remained silent for a long time. Then he exhaled in a voice that was softer than I had ever heard. Lauren. I cocked my head a bit. Dad. We remained silent for another beat before he spoke once more. I guess this is where you take pride. I grinned because I no longer required their approval, not because I was spiteful or seeking retribution. I put my cup down on an adjacent table and said, No, Dad. This is where I bid you farewell. It occurred after 3 days. Caldwell Business filed for bankruptcy. It was all over. Publications for business.online discussion boards, national news reports. Each piece presented the same image. Once a giant, Caldwell Enterprises falls overnight. How greed and nepotism sank a $300 million company. The former empire of Richard Caldwell a lesson in what not to do. The best thing, though? They all gave me credit for the business's prior success. They all emphasized the seeming reality. I was the sole reason Caldwell Enterprises had survived its initial near collapse. The software I had developed was the only reason they had prospered. and it was only a matter of time until everything fell apart once I left. What I had always known was finally shown to the world. I wasn't merely a technical individual. I wasn't merely a supporting figure in their history. The legacy was me. I was now witnessing their complete collapse. They were expected to return quickly. My assistant buzzed into my office at precisely 10 in the morning. "Lauren, your father and sister are here to see you." I took a deep breath and sat back in my chair. This was the end result. Send them in. Like specters from the past, they entered through the open doors. Emily's expensive clothes were unable to conceal the anxiety and despair in her eyes. What about my dad? He wasn't the strong, capable man I had always known for the first time in my life. He was a man who had lost everything he held dear. They took a seat on the other side of me. My father cleared his throat as though it hurt to ask me for assistance. "Look, we've had our disagreements, but we're still family at the end of the day." He bent over. "Caldwell Enterprises is having difficulties. We need your assistance." Oh, it was there. As I watched them writhe, I let the quiet grow. I finally said something. "And what precisely do you want me to do?" My father tried to restore some control by straightening his shoulders. "We're prepared to give you a position of leadership, something significant." His subsequent remarks were much more pitiful. "We might have underestimated you, I realize now." I arched an eyebrow. "You see now?" Emily, who had been silent up until now, opened her mouth. Frustrated, her voice was tight. "Don't be petty, Lauren." "Please, we need you." I chuckled. In fact, I laughed. She became agitated. "You require me?" I said it again. I looked straight at my father as I leaned forward a little. "That's funny because you told me I wasn't a good leader a year ago." My father was irritated, as if he couldn't stand this any longer. "Lauren, you understand how we conduct business. We've made decisions. However, we must now proceed. We can restore Caldwell Enterprises together if you return." Once more, there it was. Command. They weren't interested in me. They desired to possess me. I pretended to think about it as I cocked my head slightly. Additionally, "What job are you offering?" In an apparent attempt to close the transaction, my father straightened his posture. "Second in command would be you, directly below Emily." "Oh." Thus they continued to believe they could manipulate me. I blinked. Then I laughed, louder than before. Emily got red in the face. "Lauren, mature. You may have developed some software, but it doesn't mean you are capable of managing a business of our scale." I ceased to laugh. I made sure my voice was as frigid as ice as I leaned forward and rested my arms on the desk between us. "My business is worth $500 million, Emily." I stopped. "Yours is just a few weeks away from going bankrupt." I gave that some thought. Then I grinned. "Tell me again, which of us lacks business management skills?" Quiet, blissful silence. My dad cleared his throat. "Please, Lauren." And it was that word, please. The same man who, rather than treating me like his daughter, had fired me, denigrated me, and threw money in my face. I'm pleading now, and I felt calmer than ever before. "No." Emily tensed. "Pardon me?" I grinned. "No," I answered. I reclined in my seat. "Caldwell Enterprises is not necessary for me. I was necessary for you, and you tossed me aside." I straightened my blouse and got up. "You made a decision. You have to live with it now." Emily jerked to her feet. "Angry now." "You're simply resentful." "I've always made you jealous." I smiled slowly and amusingly at her. "Are you jealous?" "I don't have to feel envious, Emily." I turned to face my father with a composed, unflinching expression. "I already have all of your desires." Emily's face flushed. Deflated, my father let out a harsh exhale. I turned aside after saying that, because I was at last free for the first time in my life. As soon as my father and Emily left my office, I knew something wasn't right. The battle was lost by them, but their struggle for dominance will never end. Additionally, everything is pulled down with a sinking ship. All I had to ask was, would I allow that to occur? The last blow came 3 days after our meeting. Officially, Caldwell Enterprises was insolvent. They were all over the headlines. Caldwell Enterprises declares bankruptcy, once a powerhouse now in ruins. Family feud or business failure. The downfall of Richard Caldwell. How Nepotism Killed a Multi-Million-Dollar Company. And my own favorite, the only thing that kept Caldwell Enterprises alive, Lauren Caldwell. Each piece depicted the same reality. The business had no future without me. Their kingdom began to fall apart the instant they forced me out. They were solely responsible for their own actions. Claire, my assistant, knocked on my office door when I was in a meeting. In her hands was a printed document. "This is something you might want to see, Lauren." I grabbed the paper and scanned it. I was grinning by the time I got to the final paragraph. The liquidation of Caldwell Enterprises was underway. Everything was for sale. Is the building where their headquarters is located up for auction? The building is up for auction. What's left of them? The bidder with the highest bid will gain access. The Caldwell name itself, even, is on the table. My dad was in a dire situation. In a desperate attempt to salvage the business, he had taken out large loans and overleveraged it. And now, the bank seized everything, which implied I could purchase it. The poetic justice was nearly flawless. I pondered what I wanted that evening while sitting in my rooftop apartment and staring out over the city skyline. I was already victorious. Did I have to crush them anymore? I had the option to leave. I could have allowed Caldwell Enterprises to become a relic of a disintegrating dynasty and disappear into the past. But then I remembered that evening, a year ago. My father threw $50 on the table as if I were an underpaid worker, as if I had no value. My decision was decided in an instant. I took the initiative the following morning. I didn't use an investment company. No third party was used by me. I wanted them to be aware of the precise person stealing everything. I decided to call the bankruptcy lawyer in charge of Caldwell's liquidation. With ease, I stated, "I would like to make a direct bid on all of Caldwell Enterprises' assets." A pause. "Do you know what it would mean, Miss Caldwell?" I grinned. "I completely understand." A week later, I found myself sitting in the exact boardroom that my father had formerly dominated like a monarch. Just now, the crown was in my possession. In front of me, the final contract rested atop a sleek black and gold pen. Just one signature. All I would need to do to claim Caldwell Enterprises as my own is that. Emily and my father sat opposite me, both with pale faces. In the last week, he appeared to have aged by a further 10 years. Emily refused to even look at him. She was speechless for the first time. She had stopped smirking. Now she was losing. I grabbed the pen, stopped. I moved the papers back across the table after that. My dad blinked. Emily scowled. "What is this?" my father asked in a raspy voice. I neatly folded my hands. A counterproposal. Scanning the first page, he took up the papers. His gaze expanded. Emily grabbed the paper from him and trembled as she read the last line out loud. "All remaining rights to the Caldwell name, patents, and intellectual property will be absorbed by Nova Systems and permanently retired." Angrily, she glanced up at me. She broke off. "You're not just buying it, you're wiping it out." I looked directly into her eyes. Yes, there would never be another Caldwell Enterprises. They would never rebuild the name. The business would never be revived. It would just vanish, as if they'd attempted to make me vanish. My dad's jaw tightened. "You are merely retaliating against us." I cocked my head. "No." I grabbed the pen once more. Some things deserve to die, which is why I'm doing this. And I signed this time. It was over in an instant. Caldwell Enterprises was a thing of the past 3 months later. Nova Systems grew rapidly since my father's defunct empire had no rivals. $500 million in revenue. 62% market domination. Status. The industry's undeniable leader. However, I wasn't particularly satisfied with the numbers. I was pleased to see a business founded on merit rather than nepotism when I walked into my office each morning, observing workers who were employed because of their abilities rather than their privilege. I am observing a business I founded without obtaining the consent of my family. I was leaving the office one evening when I got a letter. No address for return. Inside was a plain handwritten note. "Lauren, I don't ask for pardon, but I'm hoping you'll understand eventually." Dad, I looked at it for a while. I threw it into the fireplace after that. The fire destroyed the last of Caldwell Enterprises. I grinned. Because I had won finally, totally. It had been 3 months since I had wiped out Caldwell Enterprises. I signed that last document 3 months ago, guaranteeing that the Caldwell name would never be raised again. It has been 3 months since my sister and father left that boardroom empty-handed. However, I felt at ease for the first time since it all started. Nova Systems was doing well. $500 million in revenue and growing. 62% market domination. Status, the industry's undeniable leader. However, I didn't feel triumphant because of the figures. The people were the cause. Every morning when I walked inside my office, I noticed talent, not last names, is what hired employees. A business founded on talent, not politics. A group that collaborated rather than a family that broke up. I had created something that was really mine for the first time, and my father had nothing to do with it. Retaliation has nothing to do with it. Only success. My assistant came knocking on my door as I was completing my schedule for the upcoming week. She carried a dainty little envelope. The color is cream, lettering in gold. I opened it and took it. Annual Gala of the Caldwell family. I just stared at it for a while. I'd completely forgotten about this. One of the most exclusive gatherings in the industry was held annually by my parents. The incident occurred when they were still in charge, when everything was still within their grasp. Right now, they had lost their influence, their empire, and their reputation. However, in some way, this incident persisted. I ought to have discarded the invitation. I ought to have disregarded it. Instead, though, I decided I was leaving, not to establish anything, not to exact revenge, but to put a definitive end to this tale. I arrived in a sleek, custom-tailored black gown the night of the gala, leaving my car with the peaceful assurance of a lady who had nothing more to prove. It was just as lavish as I remembered. The room is filled with sparkling chandeliers, tasteful music, a sea of rich elites drinking champagne as if they were still in charge of the planet. Not this time, though. The room's most powerful person was myself. They were all aware of it. Whispers followed me as I entered. Is Lauren Caldwell there? No, she now manages Nova Systems. Did she not ruin her father's business? I choose to disregard them. For them, I wasn't present. I had one reason for being here. Then I noticed them. My dad. My sister. However, they were no longer the focus of attention. They weren't encircled by influential business people negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts. Rather, they were a shadow of their former selves, off to the side. Compared to what I remembered, my father appeared smaller. Something I had never seen in him before had taken the place of his once dominant presence. I'm sorry. However, I could see the fractures in Emily's facade, even though she continued to hold herself high. The way her fingers tightened around her glass of champagne, her eyes flicked from me to me and back again. I was in charge for the first time in our lives. Both of them were aware of it. With my heels clicking on the shiny floor, I approached them. Emily tensed. My dad turned. I saw a glimpse of something flickering in his eyes. Not rage, not bitterness, simply lose. Lauren, he said. I had never heard him speak so softly. I cocked my head a bit. Dad. We were silent for a long time. Then he let out a sigh. I guess this is where you take pride. I grinned a little, not with malice, not because of winning, but because I didn't require anything from him for the first time. No, Dad. I placed my drink on a tray that was passing by. This is where I bid you farewell. Emily blinked. What? I looked over at her. I didn't come here to make fun of you. I didn't come to remind you of what you had lost. Sincerely, I'm no longer concerned about that. For the final time, I looked into my father's eyes. I have dedicated years of my life to gaining your acceptance, attempting to demonstrate my worth. I let out a slow breath. But that is no longer necessary for me. I then looked at Emily. I also don't despise you. I didn't. She opened her mouth slightly as if to disagree, but she didn't say anything. Because she was speechless for the first time, I took one last look at them both. I then turned to go. Not because I was angry, not in retaliation, but because I was actually free for the first time in my life. I inhaled deeply as I walked out of the banquet and into my car. I had been fighting for so long, a lot of effort to prove myself. And now, I was no longer required to prove anything. My own empire had been established. I had made a legacy for myself. And that, of all the retaliation, that was the best. Because getting even was never the point of this. This has to do with becoming the person I was destined to be. And I grinned as I drove off, putting the past behind me for good. Because my narrative didn't finish here, it was only the start. In retrospect, I came to several profound realizations. The goal of revenge is not to ruin people, it's about overcoming them. Even if someone has never appreciated your commitment, you owe them nothing. Being more successful than they could have ever imagined is the best way to disprove them. There is no real power in charge. It is in leaving. Ultimately, there was no need for me to ruin them. That was their own doing. I made myself into everything they said I couldn't be. And that was sufficient. That was more than sufficient.